"Sir, please, just let me try." The boy's voice cut through the humid evening air like a blade through silk. His hand rested on the car door, fingers trembling slightly, dark eyes fixed on the man in the back seat, with an intensity that made Richard Donovan's blood run cold. Donovan stared at him. This child couldn't be more than 13, maybe 14, standing there in clothes 3 sizes too large, fabric worn so thin you could see the outline of his ribs beneath. The traffic light bathed them both in red, casting shadows across the boy's face that made him look ancient and young all at once. "I said no." Donovan's voice carried the weight of 1,000 boardroom victories, the kind of tone that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "Step away from the vehicle." But the boy didn't move. Instead, he glanced past Donovan toward the back seat where Lena sat motionless, her small frame swallowed by the leather seat, legs hidden beneath a cream-colored blanket embroidered with flowers she'd once loved. Her face turned toward the window, expression flat, eyes focused on nothing. "Your daughter," the boy said softly, and something in his voice made Donovan's jaw clench. "She's trapped inside herself, the pathway between her brain and her legs. It's not broken. It's locked." Donovan felt his pulse spike. "You listen to me, you little—" "The accident," the boy continued, undeterred, his voice gaining strength. "Whatever happened to her, it wasn't just physical. The trauma created a neurological barrier, a kind of protective mechanism. Her nervous system shut down motor function to the lower extremities because her brain associated movement with the memory of pain. It's called conversion paralysis, but it's more specific than that. The muscles aren't atrophied. I can tell by the way the blanket drapes over her legs there's still mass there. The joints haven't locked from disuse. This isn't permanent spinal damage. This is psychosomatic paralysis triggered by acute traumatic stress. And it's created a feedback loop where her body refuses to acknowledge signals from the motor cortex." The words hit Donovan like physical blows. He'd heard similar explanations from doctors, had paid 6 figures to specialists in Switzerland who'd used comparable terminology, but they'd all concluded the same thing: irreversible, permanent. His daughter would never walk again. Yet here was this street kid, this beggar boy, who moments ago had been offering to squeegee his windshield for spare change, speaking with the precision of a neurosurgeon. "Who are you?" Donovan demanded, but his voice had lost its edge. The boy's name was Caleb, though Donovan wouldn't learn that until later. Right now, all that mattered was the way Lena's head had turned, just slightly, just enough, toward the sound of his voice. It was the first voluntary movement she'd made in 6 weeks that wasn't prompted by a physical therapist or her father's desperate pleading. "I learned from my grandmother," Caleb said, and his eyes held a depth of sorrow that no child should carry. "She was a healer in our village before we came here, before she died. She taught me that the body remembers everything, every injury, every fear, every moment of terror. And sometimes, when something terrible happens, the body protects itself by forgetting how to do things that once felt natural. Walking, running, moving. But the capability is still there. The neural pathways are dormant, not destroyed. They can be reawakened if you know where to apply pressure, how to remind the nervous system that it's safe to function again." Donovan opened his mouth to respond, to tell this boy that he'd exhausted every option, that teams of the world's finest medical professionals had examined Lena with equipment worth millions, had mapped every nerve and scanned every vertebra. But before he could speak, Lena's voice, small, fragile, barely above a whisper, broke through the space between them. "Let him try, Daddy." Those 4 words shattered something inside Richard Donovan's chest. Lena hadn't called him Daddy in 8 months. She'd barely spoken at all since the accident, since the night the drunk driver had smashed into their SUV on the Pacific Coast Highway, since the moment Donovan had pulled her from the wreckage and watched the light drain from her eyes, even though she was still breathing, still alive, but somehow absent. The doctors said she'd been thrown against the doorframe. They said her spine had compressed at the L4-L5 vertebrae. They said the imaging showed inflammation, possible nerve damage, probable permanent paralysis. They'd used words like incomplete spinal cord injury and motor neuron disruption. They'd explained that her upper motor neurons were likely intact, but that the signals weren't reaching her lower extremities due to interference in the spinal pathway. Donovan had nodded through all of it, had written checks that could have funded small countries, had chartered jets to clinics in Tokyo, Munich, and Boston. He'd watched his daughter endure painful electrical stimulation therapies, experimental stem cell treatments, intensive physiotherapy that left her crying from exhaustion. Nothing had changed, nothing had helped, and now this boy was saying it was all wrong. "Step out of the car," Caleb said, and it wasn't a request anymore. There was something commanding in his voice, something that made Donovan's hand move to the door handle before his brain had fully processed the decision. The street was busy. Downtown traffic at 6:30 on a Thursday evening, cars honking, people rushing past on sidewalks, the smell of exhaust mixing with food from nearby restaurants. The light had turned green, but Donovan's driver, Marcus, sat frozen behind the wheel, watching this scene unfold in the rearview mirror with an expression caught between concern and curiosity. Donovan climbed out. The heat hit him immediately, that thick, Los Angeles humidity that made his tailored suit feel like it weighed 50 pounds. He rounded the car to where Caleb stood by the rear passenger door, and up close, the boy looked even younger, even more fragile, but his hands were steady as he reached for the door handle. "I need to examine her legs," Caleb said, looking Donovan directly in the eye. "I need to touch her, to feel the muscle tone, to test the reflexes that the doctors probably told you were absent. I promise I won't hurt her. But I need your permission." Everything in Donovan's instinct screamed at him to refuse, to protect his daughter from this stranger, this child who claimed impossible things. But Lena was looking at him through the window now, really looking at him for the first time in so long, and her eyes held something he'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. He pulled open the door. Caleb climbed into the back seat, with a gracefulness that seemed at odds with his appearance. He knelt on the floor of the car, his knees on the rubber mat, and gently pulled back the blanket covering Lena's legs. She wore soft cotton pants, pale blue, and her feet were bare. Her nurses always removed her shoes when they settled her in the car because she couldn't feel them anyway. So why bother with the discomfort? "Hello," Caleb said to Lena, his voice soft, warm. "My name is Caleb. Your father is going to stand right there and watch everything I do, okay? And if anything feels uncomfortable or scary, you tell me immediately and I'll stop. Can you do that?" Lena nodded, and Donovan felt his throat tighten. Caleb placed his hands on Lena's right leg, just above the knee, and closed his eyes. His fingers moved with precise, deliberate pressure, feeling along the quadriceps, down to the vastus medialis, applying gentle force to areas that seemed random, but clearly weren't. He was mapping something, reading information through touch that Donovan couldn't begin to understand. "The muscles are intact," Caleb murmured, almost to himself. "Good tone, minimal atrophy. The joints." He moved to her ankle, rotating it slowly, carefully. Full range of motion, no calcification, no restriction. His hands traveled up to her hip, pressing along the iliac crest, down to the greater trochanter. "The skeletal structure is perfect. This isn't physical damage. This is neural suppression." He opened his eyes and looked at Donovan. When the accident happened, was she conscious afterward? Donovan's mind flashed back to that night. The screech of tires, the explosion of glass, the way the world had tilted and spun. "Yes," he said, his voice rough. "She was screaming. She was terrified," Caleb finished, "and in pain, extreme pain, the kind that makes your brain think you're dying." In that moment, her nervous system made a decision. It shut down all non-essential motor functions to the lower body to redirect all resources to survival. Heart, lungs, brain, those got priority. Everything else went dark. But here's what the doctors missed. That shutdown never reversed. The threat is gone, but her body doesn't know that. It's still in protection mode. The neural pathways that control voluntary movement in her legs are suppressed by an overactive sympathetic nervous system response. Donovan stared at him. That's not possible. We've had neurologists examine her. They've done EMG tests, nerve conduction studies. They looked for damage, Caleb interrupted gently. They looked for broken pathways. But the pathways aren't broken. They're just asleep. And you can't see that on an EMG if you don't know what you're looking for. The signals are so faint, so suppressed, that they register as absent. But they're there. He turned back to Lena. "I'm going to try something now. It might feel strange. It might hurt a little at first, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Lena looked at her father. Donovan wanted to say no, wanted to pull his daughter away from this impossible situation. But instead, he found himself nodding. "Do it," he heard himself say. Caleb's hands moved to Lena's lower back, his fingers finding points along her spine with the certainty of a surgeon. He pressed down, hard, and Lena gasped. "There," Caleb said. "Right there. Do you feel that? Not pain, but pressure. Deep pressure." I don't know," Lena whispered. "Maybe. That's good. That's connection. Your brain is receiving the signal. Now, we wake up the pathway." His hands began to work in a pattern that seemed both ancient and precise. He pressed specific points along her lumbar spine, held them for exact counts of seconds, released, moved lower. He was working the sacral nerve roots, Donovan realized. S1 through S4, the nerves responsible for motor control of the legs and feet. But this wasn't standard physical therapy. This was something else entirely, something that looked almost ritualistic in its precision. Caleb's fingers found the sciatic notch, applied deep pressure that made Lena inhale sharply. He held it, counting under his breath, then released and moved to the other side. His hands traveled down to the popliteal fossa behind her knee, finding pressure points that corresponded to nerve branches Donovan had never heard doctors mention. "The tibial nerve branches here," Caleb murmured, his fingers working with increasing speed now. "And the common perineal nerve here. They're both suppressed, both dormant. We need to send a signal strong enough to override the suppression, to remind the nervous system that these pathways exist and that it's safe to use them." He moved to her feet, his thumbs pressing into the arch with force that looked painful, but Lena didn't protest. He worked each toe individually, manipulating joints, applying pressure to points between the metatarsals. Then he returned to her spine, his hands moving in long, firm strokes down the entire length of her lower back, over and over, creating heat, creating sensation. "Breathe," he told Lena. "Deep breaths, in through your nose, out through your mouth. I want you to imagine the air traveling all the way down your spine, down your legs, to your toes. I want you to picture light filling those dark spaces." And Lena did. Donovan watched his daughter's chest rise and fall, watched her eyes close, watched her face relax in a way it hadn't in 2 years. Caleb's hands never stopped moving. He was relentless, working the same points over and over, his own breathing synchronizing with Lena's. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the air conditioning in the car. His lips moved silently, words Donovan couldn't hear, but suspected were some kind of prayer or incantation his grandmother had taught him. Minutes passed. 5, 10. Donovan's legs began to ache from standing, but he couldn't move, couldn't look away. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, people curious about why an expensive black sedan was stopped in the middle of the street with its door open, why a businessman stood watching a kid work over someone in the back seat. Marcus had gotten out of the driver's seat, standing nearby, his hand hovering near his phone, clearly uncertain whether to call for help or just witness whatever was happening. Then Lena's right foot twitched. It was small, just the toes curling slightly, then releasing. But Donovan saw it, his heart stopped. "Did you—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I felt it," Lena breathed. "Daddy, I felt something. Like pins and needles. Like when your foot falls asleep and starts to wake up." Caleb's face broke into a smile. "That's perfect. That's exactly what we want. That's the nerves remembering how to fire. Stay with that feeling. Don't fight it. Let it spread." He increased the intensity of his work, his hands moving faster now, applying deeper pressure. He pressed both thumbs into the points on either side of her sacrum and held them there with all his weight, and Lena cried out, not in pain, but in shock. "Both feet," she said, her voice rising. "I can feel both feet. Oh God, Daddy, I can feel my feet." Tears were streaming down her face now, and down Donovan's, and he didn't care that people were watching, didn't care about anything except the sight of his daughter's legs beginning to move. Small movements, just shifting slightly, but movements she was controlling, movements that came from her own will. "Now comes the hard part," Caleb said, his voice steady despite his obvious exhaustion. "I need you to sit up straighter. Can you do that?" Lena pushed herself upright, her hands gripping the seat, and Caleb moved to kneel beside her instead of in front of her. He placed one hand on her lower back and one on her knee. "I'm going to help you stand," he said. "But you have to do most of the work. I'm just here to steady you, to remind your body that it knows how to do this. When I count to 3, I want you to push down with your feet and straighten your legs. Don't think about it. Just do it. Trust your body. 1." Donovan moved closer, his hands reaching out instinctively to catch his daughter if she fell. 2. Lena's face was a mask of concentration and fear and desperate hope. 3. She pushed, and nothing happened. "Again," Caleb said immediately, no disappointment in his voice. "The pathway is open, but it's weak. It needs reinforcement again. Push." Lena tried again. Her legs trembled, muscles firing in uncoordinated spasms, but she didn't rise. "Again." "I can't," Lena sobbed. "I can't do it." "You can," Caleb said firmly. "You are doing it. Your muscles are responding. They just need to remember the pattern. One more time. Put everything you have into it. Imagine yourself standing. See it in your mind, feel it in your body, and push." Lena took a shuddering breath. She closed her eyes, and she pushed with everything she had left. Her legs straightened, her body rose, and for the first time in 743 days, Lena Donovan stood on her own 2 feet. The sound that came out of Richard Donovan's mouth was not human. It was something primal, something torn from the deepest part of his soul. Grief and joy and disbelief and gratitude all mixed into a single, broken sob. He fell to his knees on the dirty street, his expensive suit forgotten, his hands reaching for his daughter, who was standing, actually standing, her legs shaking like a newborn calf, but holding her weight, supporting her. "Daddy," Lena whispered, and then she took a step. It was clumsy, uncoordinated, her right foot dragging slightly before she managed to lift it and place it forward. But it was a step, then another, and another. She stumbled, and Donovan surged forward, catching her, holding her as they both collapsed together onto the car seat, clutching each other and crying in a way that made the gathered crowd fall silent with the weight of what they'd just witnessed. Caleb stepped back, his own eyes wet, a small smile on his face. He looked exhausted, completely drained, his thin frame swaying slightly as if he might collapse. But there was satisfaction in his expression, a quiet pride that came from knowing he'd just changed someone's entire world. Marcus was crying too, Donovan noticed distantly. The driver who'd been with their family for 15 years, who'd driven Lena to countless doctor's appointments, who'd helped carry her wheelchair in and out of the car hundreds of times, stood on the sidewalk with his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. Someone in the crowd started clapping. Then another person joined. Within seconds, the entire gathering was applauding, some wiping away tears, others recording on their phones, all of them somehow understanding they had witnessed something extraordinary. Donovan pulled back from Lena, cupping her face in his hands, studying her eyes that were bright and alive and present in a way they hadn't been since before the accident. She was really here. His daughter was really here. "How?" he managed to say, turning to look at Caleb. "How did you know? How did you do that?" Caleb shrugged, the gesture making him look every bit the child he was. "My grandmother," he said simply. "She taught me that Western medicine is very good at fixing things that are broken, but sometimes things aren't broken. They're just disconnected. And reconnection requires a different kind of knowledge. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers, going back generations. It's about understanding that the body and mind aren't separate things. Trauma doesn't just hurt us physically. It changes how our nervous system functions, how our brain communicates with our body. And sometimes you can reverse that change if you know which pathways to stimulate, which pressure points to activate, how to remind the body that it's safe to let go of its protective mechanisms." He looked at Lena, who was now standing again, this time with more stability, her hands on her father's shoulders for balance. "The accident made your body think that using your legs would lead to more pain, more danger. So it shut them down to protect you. All I did was show your nervous system that the danger is gone, that it's safe to move again. The rest was you. You did the hard work. You trusted yourself enough to try." Donovan stood slowly, his legs unsteady, his mind reeling. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet, fumbling with shaking hands. I want to. How much do I pay you? Name any price. Anything. Everything I have, it's yours. But Caleb shook his head, backing away slightly. I don't want money, sir. Then what? A house? Education? I can get you into any school in the country. I'm just glad she can walk again, Caleb interrupted quietly. That's enough. He turned to leave, to disappear back into the crowd, but Donovan's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. The boy tensed, and Donovan immediately loosened his grip, suddenly aware of how his touch might feel, threatening to a kid who lived on the streets. Please, Donovan said, and the word came out strangled. Please don't go. You can't just. My daughter was dying inside. We both were. You gave us our lives back. Let me give you something in return. Let me help you. Caleb looked at him for a long moment, those dark eyes searching Donovan's face for something. Sincerity, maybe, or trustworthiness. Whatever he was looking for, he must have found it because his shoulders relaxed slightly. I don't need charity, he said carefully. It's not charity, Donovan replied immediately. It's gratitude. It's recognition. You have a gift, son, a real gift. And gifts like that shouldn't be wasted on street corners. They should be developed, refined, shared with people who need them. Come with us, just for tonight. Have a meal, get cleaned up, sleep in a real bed, and tomorrow, if you want to leave, you can. But please, give me one night to say thank you properly. Lena's voice joined her. Father's. Please, she said, her words still shaky but gaining strength. Please stay. I want to know more about your grandmother. I want to understand what you did. And maybe it was the exhaustion finally catching up with him. Or maybe it was the genuine warmth in their voices. Or maybe it was simply that Caleb was tired of being cold and hungry and alone. Whatever the reason, he nodded. One night, he agreed. Just one night. Donovan felt relief flood through him so powerfully he nearly collapsed again. Marcus had already moved to open the other rear door, and Caleb climbed in hesitantly, settling into the seat across from Lena, who immediately reached across the space to take his hand. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for giving me my life back. Caleb squeezed her hand gently. You always had it, he said. You just couldn't remember how to reach it, that's all. Sometimes we forget who we are when bad things happen. But we're still there, underneath, always. As Marcus pulled the car back into traffic, Donovan sat in stunned silence, watching his daughter and this remarkable boy. His mind already racing through everything that had to happen next. Caleb would need medical documentation of what he'd done. This needed to be studied, understood, replicated. He'd need protection too. Once word got out about this, every desperate person with an injured loved one would come looking for him. He'd need education, proper training, maybe even formal medical schooling if he wanted it. But more than any of that, he needed safety. He needed to know that the gift his grandmother had given him wouldn't be exploited or wasted. And Donovan would make damn sure of it. The city lights blurred past the windows as they drove through downtown toward Donovan's Malibu estate, the mansion he'd bought in better times, when he'd still believed money could solve any problem. It was perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, with 12 bedrooms, an Olympic pool, a home theater, and more space than any 3 people could ever need. Lena hadn't been upstairs in her own home since the accident because he'd had an entire medical suite built on the ground floor, complete with accessible bathroom, specialized bed, and equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that was now, miraculously, unnecessary. As they drove, Caleb stared out the window with an expression that was hard to read. Wonder, maybe, mixed with wariness. This was a kid who'd learned not to trust good fortune, who understood that generosity often came with strings attached. Donovan needed to prove him wrong. Tell me about your grandmother, he said gently, and Caleb's gaze shifted from the window to Donovan's face. Her name was Amara, Caleb said softly. She was born in a village in Kenya, in the highlands near Mount Kenya. She was the 7th daughter of a 7th daughter, which in our culture meant she was marked for healing from birth. She learned everything about the body, about herbs, about pressure points, about the way energy flows through us. She could cure things the doctors couldn't even diagnose. People would travel for days to see her. How did you end up here? Lena asked, her voice full of genuine curiosity. Caleb's expression darkened. War. Our village was caught between rival factions fighting over land and resources. My parents were killed when I was 8. My grandmother brought me here, to America, seeking asylum. But the process was complicated, and we had no money, no connections. While we waited for our case to be heard, we lived wherever we could, shelters mostly, sometimes the street. She kept teaching me, though. Every day she'd show me something new, how to read a body's signals, how to find the blockages, how to heal. Where is she now? Donovan asked, though he suspected he knew the answer from the past tense Caleb had used earlier. She died 6 months ago, Caleb said, and his voice broke slightly. Pneumonia. We couldn't afford treatment. By the time the free clinic saw her, it was too late. She made me promise that I'd use what she taught me to help people. She said the knowledge had been passed down through generations, and it was my responsibility to keep it alive. The car fell silent except for the hum of the engine and the distant sound of traffic. Donovan felt something hard and cold settle in his chest. Rage at a system that had let a healer die from something as treatable as pneumonia, while he'd been spending millions on treatments that didn't work. I'm sorry, he said inadequately. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Caleb just nodded, turning back to the window. They drove for another 40 minutes, the cityscape gradually giving way to the winding coastal highway, the ocean appearing as a dark expanse to their left, dotted with the lights of boats and distant oil platforms. Lena had dozed off, exhausted from the effort of standing and walking, her head resting against the window. Caleb, too, seemed on the verge of sleep, his thin body finally relaxing into the leather seat. When they finally pulled through the security gates of Donovan's estate, Caleb's eyes went wide. The main house was lit up like a palace, every window glowing, the landscaping illuminated by carefully placed lights that made the gardens look like something from a fairy tale. The circular driveway wrapped around a fountain, a marble sculpture of dolphins that Lena had picked out years ago, and the sound of water splashing mixed with the distant crash of waves on the rocks below. Marcus brought the car to a stop at the main entrance, and immediately the front doors opened. Mrs. Chen, the house manager, emerged, her face creased with concern that transformed into shock when she saw Lena standing, actually standing, as she climbed out of the car. Mr. Donovan, Mrs. Chen stammered, her eyes filling with tears. How is this? It's a long story, Donovan said, moving to support Lena as she took tentative steps toward the house, her legs still unsteady but growing stronger with each movement. Mrs. Chen, this is Caleb. He's going to be staying with us. I need you to prepare the blue guest suite for him. Fresh clothes, toiletries, anything he needs. And have chef prepare something immediately. I don't care what, just something nutritious and filling. Mrs. Chen, to her credit, didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and gestured for them to follow her inside. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. Soaring ceilings, original artwork, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. But Donovan barely noticed it anymore. He'd stopped seeing his home years ago. It had become just another space to exist in, another reminder of how all his wealth had been worthless when it came to helping his daughter. Now, though, seeing it through Caleb's eyes, watching the boy take in the grand staircase, the chandelier made of Murano glass, the panoramic windows overlooking the ocean, Donovan felt a strange mixture of embarrassment and determination. This was too much for anyone, but especially for a kid who'd been sleeping on streets. He needed to make Caleb understand that this wasn't about flaunting wealth. It was about providing safety, about creating space for healing and growth. They settled in the informal living room, a space Donovan preferred because it felt less like a museum and more like a place where people actually lived. Oversized sofas, thick rugs, bookshelves lining the walls. Mrs. Chen appeared within minutes with platters of food, roasted chicken, fresh bread, salad, fruit, pasta, and Caleb's eyes went wide at the spread. Please, Donovan said, gesturing to the food. Eat as much as you want. Caleb didn't need to be told twice. He ate with the focused intensity of someone who'd known real hunger, who didn't take food for granted. Lena picked at a piece of chicken, her appetite still suppressed by exhaustion and overwhelming emotion. But she watched Caleb with a small smile, clearly pleased that he was comfortable enough to eat freely. When Caleb finally slowed down, looking almost embarrassed by how much he'd consumed, Donovan leaned forward. I want to propose something to you, he said carefully, "and I want you to know that there's no pressure. You can say no, and we'll still help you however you need. But I think there's an opportunity here for something extraordinary." Caleb looked at him warily. "What kind of opportunity?" "You have knowledge that the medical establishment needs," Donovan said. "What you did today, helping Lena walk again, that's not luck. That's skill, understanding, expertise. And I'm willing to bet there are thousands, maybe millions of people out there suffering from conditions that doctors can't solve because they're looking in the wrong places. People like Lena, whose problems aren't purely physical, but are caught in that space between body and mind." He paused, gauging Caleb's reaction. The boy's face was unreadable. "I want to fund your education," Donovan continued. "Full scholarship to any school you want. I want to connect you with researchers, neurologists, specialists who can help you understand the science behind what your grandmother taught you. And I want to create a clinic, a place where people can come for this kind of healing, where your knowledge can be preserved and shared and developed." "You want to study me," Caleb said flatly. "No," Donovan said firmly. "I want to learn from you. There's a difference. You're not a curiosity or an experiment. You're a healer with gifts that could change lives. But those gifts need protection, development, proper context. Right now, if you go back out on those streets and word spreads about what you can do, you'll be overwhelmed. People will take advantage of you. Desperate people do desperate things. I can give you resources, security, education. In return, all I ask is that you share what you know with people who can help amplify it." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on the arm of the sofa. "My grandmother always said that healing knowledge should be free," he finally said. "That charging money for it violated the sacred trust between healer and patient." "I agree," Donovan said immediately. "The clinic would be nonprofit, funded by my foundation, offering services free of charge to anyone who needs them. You'd never have to worry about money again. You'd have everything you need, and your only job would be to heal and to teach." "And what if I don't want that?" Caleb asked, his voice challenging. "What if I want to go back to the streets, to help people where they are, instead of waiting for them to come to some fancy clinic?" "Then that's your choice," Donovan said simply. "I meant what I said. No pressure. If you want to leave tomorrow and never see us again, you can. But I'm offering you an alternative, a chance to honor your grandmother's legacy on a scale she probably never imagined possible." Lena, who'd been quiet through this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "You saved my life," she said to Caleb. "Not just physically, I was disappearing, becoming invisible even to myself. And you saw me. You understood something about me that no one else did. That's not just medical knowledge, that's compassion, that's wisdom, and the world needs more of that, not less." Her words hung in the air, and Donovan saw Caleb's defenses crack slightly. This kid wanted to say yes, that was obvious. But he was scared, uncertain, conditioned by hard experience not to trust offers that seemed too good to be true. 1 month, Donovan proposed. "Stay here for 1 month. Let us show you what we're proposing. Meet with doctors, researchers, see if there's potential for collaboration. If at the end of that month you want to leave, we'll support you however you want to be supported. Housing, job training, whatever you need. But give us 30 days to prove that this could work." Caleb looked at him, then at Lena, then down at his hands, those remarkable hands that had just performed what every specialist in the world had deemed impossible. 1 month, he agreed quietly. "But I want to be clear about something. I'm not some magical miracle worker. What I did today, it doesn't always work. Sometimes the damage is real. The pathways are truly broken. Sometimes people can't be healed, no matter how much pressure you apply, or how many prayers you say. I don't want people thinking I can cure everything because I can't." "Understood," Donovan said, relief flooding through him. "We'll be very clear about that. This isn't about false hope. It's about offering an alternative approach for the cases that fall through the cracks of conventional medicine." Mrs. Chen reappeared then, her timing perfect as always, to inform them that Caleb's room was ready. The boy stood hesitantly, suddenly looking uncomfortable again, out of place in his tattered clothes in this palace of a home. "Mrs. Chen will show you to your room," Donovan said gently. "There should be clothes in your size in the closet. Nothing fancy, just basics. Shower, sleep as long as you want. Tomorrow we'll talk more. And Caleb, thank you. You've given me my daughter back. There aren't words big enough to express what that means." Caleb nodded, then followed Mrs. Chen out of the room. Lena watched him go, then turned to her father with an expression of such fierce determination that it took his breath away. "We have to help him, Daddy," she said. "Not because of what he did for me, but because it's right. He's all alone. He's lost everything. And he's still trying to help people. That's the kind of person we should be supporting." "I know, sweetheart," Donovan said, pulling her into a hug. "We will, I promise." They sat together in silence for a while, father and daughter reunited in a way that had seemed impossible just hours ago. Donovan kept expecting to wake up, to discover this was all some cruel dream. But Lena was warm and solid in his arms, her legs curled beneath her on the sofa, in a position she hadn't been able to achieve in 2 years, and the evidence was undeniable. His daughter could walk again. A street kid with no credentials, no medical degree, no fancy equipment had accomplished what teams of specialists could not, and Donovan was going to make sure the world knew about it. Not for publicity, not for recognition, but because somewhere out there were other Lenas. People trapped in their own bodies by trauma and fear. People whose nervous systems had betrayed them in an attempt to protect them. People who'd been told there was no hope when really there was just no one who knew how to see the problem clearly. Caleb represented a different paradigm, a different way of understanding the human body. And if Donovan could bridge the gap between that ancient wisdom and modern science, they could create something revolutionary. He just needed Caleb to trust him long enough to make it happen. That night, Donovan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through possibilities and plans and potential obstacles. Around 2 in the morning, he gave up and went to his home office, booting up his computer and beginning to research everything he could find about conversion paralysis, psychosomatic disorders, the connection between trauma and physical dysfunction. What he found was fascinating and frustrating in equal measure. The medical literature acknowledged that psychological trauma could manifest as physical symptoms, paralysis, blindness, seizures, but the treatment protocols were primarily psychiatric, talk therapy, EMDR, medication for anxiety and depression. Very little about physical intervention, about the kind of hands-on healing Caleb had demonstrated. There were some references to traditional healing practices in various cultures, acupuncture, reflexology, energy work, but most of the sources were dismissive, categorizing these approaches as placebo effects or unscientific folklore. Reading between the lines, Donovan could see the bias clearly. Western medicine wanted quantifiable, replicable results. It wanted to understand mechanisms of action, biochemical pathways, measurable outcomes. And when faced with healing modalities that didn't fit neatly into those frameworks, it simply dismissed them as invalid. But he'd witnessed the results firsthand. Lena could walk. That was empirical evidence, undeniable and measurable. The question was how to study and replicate what Caleb had done without destroying the essential humanity at its core. Around 4 in the morning, Donovan heard footsteps in the hallway. He emerged from his office to find Lena, walking slowly but steadily, making her way toward the kitchen. She startled when she saw him, then smiled. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Too much to process," he admitted. "How are your legs feeling?" "Sore," she said honestly, "like I just ran a marathon, but also alive. I can feel them, Daddy. Every muscle, every nerve. It's overwhelming and wonderful at the same time." They made tea together, chamomile for her, black coffee for him, and sat at the kitchen island talking quietly while the ocean whispered against the rocks outside. "I've been thinking about what you said to Caleb," Lena said eventually, "about creating a clinic, studying his methods. It's a good idea, but you need to be careful not to turn him into some kind of circus attraction. He's been through enough." "I know," Donovan said. "That's why I'm trying to figure out the right approach. How do we validate what he does without subjecting him to a battery of skeptical doctors who'll just try to debunk his abilities?" "You find doctors who are open-minded," Lena suggested. "Ones who are willing to consider that maybe their training didn't include everything there is to know about healing. They exist. I've read about them. Integrative medicine specialists, people who combine Eastern and Western approaches. Start there." She was right, of course. His brilliant daughter, whose mind had remained sharp even while her body was trapped, had cut straight to the heart of the problem. "When did you get so wise?" he asked, ruffling her hair the way he used to when she was little. "When I spent 2 years unable to move," she said simply. "You do a lot of thinking when your body stops working. You realize how much we take for granted, how much we don't understand about the connection between our minds and our physical selves. What Caleb did today, he didn't just fix my legs, he fixed the disconnection. He reminded my brain and body that they're supposed to work together. That's profound, Dad. That's worth protecting and developing. They talked until dawn began to lighten the sky, making plans and contingencies, discussing possibilities and pitfalls. By the time the sun fully rose, Donovan had the outline of a strategy. He'd reach out to Dr. Sarah Martinez, a neurologist at UCLA who'd published papers on the mind-body connection and who'd been one of the few doctors to suggest that Lena's paralysis might have a psychological component. She'd been right, it turned out, though even she hadn't known how to treat it. He'd also contact a few trusted friends in the medical research community, people who valued innovation over orthodoxy, who'd be excited rather than threatened by Caleb's abilities. And he'd hire a lawyer to help navigate the legal complexities of having a minor with no documentation living in his home, working toward formal guardianship if Caleb was willing. It was going to be complicated, but Donovan had built a fortune from the ground up through sheer determination and strategic thinking. He could apply those same skills to this new mission. Around 7, Mrs. Chen arrived to start her day, and shortly after that, they heard movement upstairs. Caleb emerged hesitantly, dressed in the clothes that had been left for him, jeans and a simple blue t-shirt that actually fit, though he still looked painfully thin. His hair was wet from a shower, and without the grime of the streets, he looked even younger than Donovan had initially thought. "Good morning," Donovan greeted him warmly. "How did you sleep?" "Like I was dead," Caleb admitted, a small smile crossing his face. "That bed was... I don't even have words for it. I think I slept better last night than I have in 3 years combined." "Good," Lena said. "You needed it. Come have breakfast." They ate together, omelets, fresh fruit, toast, and Donovan was pleased to see Caleb eating with less desperation than the night before, as if he was beginning to trust that food would continue to be available. They made casual conversation, learning more about each other. Caleb talked about his memories of Kenya, about helping his grandmother tend to patients, about the frustration of watching her skills be dismissed by American doctors who didn't understand her approach. She tried to explain it to them, he said, spreading jam on his toast with careful precision, about the energy pathways, about how trauma creates blockages. But they'd just pat her on the head and prescribe antibiotics. They never listened, never tried to learn. "That's going to change," Donovan said. "If you're willing to teach, I'll find people ready to learn." After breakfast, Donovan made his calls. Dr. Martinez answered on the third ring, and when he explained what had happened, carefully, emphasizing the medical aspects rather than anything that might sound too mystical, she was silent for a long moment. "That's not possible," she finally said. "I examined Lena myself. The paralysis was entrenched. Even if it was psychosomatic in origin, the neural pathways would have adapted. You can't just reverse that kind of dysfunction with manual pressure." "And yet she walked," Donovan said simply. "She's walking right now. I'm watching her. This is real, Sarah." Another long pause. "I need to see her, today if possible. And I need to meet this boy. Can you be here by noon? I'll clear my schedule." Dr. Martinez arrived exactly at noon, driving up in a sensible hybrid, her professional demeanor barely concealing her skepticism and curiosity. She was in her early 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Donovan had always respected her willingness to consider unconventional explanations, but even she looked doubtful as he led her into the living room where Lena and Caleb were waiting. Then Lena stood up from the sofa, smoothly, easily, with only a slight wobble, and walked across the room to greet her. Dr. Martinez's face went pale. "How is this possible?" "Caleb can explain better than I can," Lena said, gesturing to where the boy sat, looking nervous under the doctor's scrutiny. What followed was one of the most remarkable conversations Donovan had ever witnessed. Dr. Martinez, to her credit, approached Caleb not with condescension, but with genuine intellectual curiosity. She asked detailed questions about his technique, about the pressure points he'd used, about the theoretical framework his grandmother had taught him. Caleb responded with impressive articulation, explaining concepts of energy flow and neural suppression in terms that bridged traditional healing and modern neuroscience. He talked about how trauma creates what his grandmother had called sticky spots, places where the nervous system gets caught in a loop, unable to move forward or release. He described how specific pressure points could interrupt those loops, essentially resetting the system. Dr. Martinez listened with growing fascination, occasionally interjecting with technical questions about nerve pathways and neurotransmitters. And slowly, Donovan watched her skepticism transform into something else: possibility. "This is incredible," she breathed when Caleb finished. "What you're describing, it actually aligns with some cutting-edge research on neuroplasticity and trauma recovery. We know that the nervous system can rewire itself, that neural pathways can be strengthened or weakened based on repeated stimulation. What you're doing is manually triggering that rewiring process." "Can you document it?" Donovan asked. "Study it properly?" Dr. Martinez looked at Caleb with an expression of deep respect. "With your permission, I'd like to run some tests on Lena. Before and after imaging, nerve conduction studies, detailed neurological exams. Not to doubt what happened, but to understand it, to create a baseline that we can use to replicate the treatment with other patients." "Other patients?" Caleb asked, surprise evident in his voice. "If this works, and clearly it does, then there are implications far beyond just Lena's case," Dr. Martinez explained. "We're talking about a potential treatment for conversion disorders, for certain types of chronic pain, for trauma-related dysfunction. This could be revolutionary." Over the following hours, Dr. Martinez conducted examination after examination, documenting everything with meticulous care. She brought in portable equipment from her car, running tests that measured nerve response, muscle activation, and brain activity. She took detailed notes on Lena's range of motion, her gait, her reflexes, and at the end of it all, she sat down with a stack of printouts and shook her head in wonder. "The improvement is extraordinary," she said. "Her neural pathways are firing normally. The muscles show full activation. There's no sign of the suppression that was evident in her previous scans. Whatever Caleb did, it created lasting change." "So what's next?" Donovan asked. Dr. Martinez looked at Caleb. "Would you be willing to work with me? I have several patients with similar presentations, trauma-induced paralysis or dysfunction that hasn't responded to conventional treatment. With proper protocols and documentation, we could develop a legitimate therapeutic approach." Caleb glanced at Donovan, then at Lena, uncertainty written across his young face. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said quietly. "What if it doesn't work for them? What if I make things worse?" "You won't work alone," Dr. Martinez assured him. "I'll be there every step of the way, monitoring everything, ensuring patient safety, and we'll start slowly, with carefully selected cases. This isn't about pushing you beyond your abilities. It's about understanding those abilities so we can help more people." "And you'll listen to him?" Lena asked suddenly, her voice sharp with protective intensity. "Really listen? Not just dismiss what he knows because it doesn't fit into your medical textbooks?" Dr. Martinez met Lena's challenging gaze steadily. "I promise," she said. "I've spent my career studying the things that medical textbooks can't explain. I'm not interested in debunking Caleb. I'm interested in learning from him." The commitment in her voice must have convinced Caleb because he nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "I'll try, for 1 month, like Mr. Donovan said. We'll see how it goes." "That's all I'm asking," Dr. Martinez said, and she smiled, a real smile that transformed her serious face into something warm and genuine. The month that followed was a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Martinez brought in colleagues she trusted, specialists in neurology, psychiatry, pain management, and integrative medicine. They met at Donovan's home initially, treating it as neutral ground where Caleb felt comfortable, and they approached him not as a curiosity, but as a consultant, someone with expertise they lacked. The first patient they brought for treatment was a woman named Rebecca, 43, who'd lost the ability to use her left hand after a car accident similar to Lena's. The scans showed no structural damage, but her hand had been curled into a tight fist for 6 months, unresponsive to physical therapy or medication. Caleb worked with her for over 2 hours, applying the same techniques he'd used on Lena, his hands moving with practiced precision over her shoulder, arm, and hand. The doctors watched in fascinated silence as Rebecca's fingers gradually began to uncurl, as sensation returned, as she started to cry with relief and disbelief. By the end of the session, she could open and close her hand voluntarily. It wasn't perfect, The movement was slow and required concentration, but it was undeniable progress where none had existed before. How? Rebecca kept asking, staring at her hand as if it belonged to someone else. How did you do that? Your body remembered how, Caleb told her gently. It just needed someone to remind it that it was safe to remember. The doctors documented everything with scientific rigor, measuring before and after stats, noting the specific pressure points Caleb used, the duration of treatment, the patient's subjective experience. They were building a database of evidence, creating a foundation for what Dr. Martinez had started calling trauma-informed manual therapy. Not every case was a success. Some patients experienced minimal improvement, others showed temporary gains that faded within days. Caleb took the failures hard, blaming himself even when Dr. Martinez gently explained that some damage was indeed permanent, that his abilities had limits. You can't save everyone, Lena told him one evening when he was particularly discouraged after a session with a patient who'd shown no response. They were sitting on the terrace overlooking the ocean, watching the sun set in brilliant oranges and reds. But you can save some people, and for those people, you're everything. It doesn't feel like enough, Caleb admitted. It never does, Lena said wisely. But enough is better than nothing, and nothing is what they had before you. Caleb had settled into life at the estate with cautious grace. He still sometimes seemed startled by the abundance around him, the endless food, the comfortable clothes, the safety. Mrs. Chen had essentially adopted him, making sure he ate properly and got enough sleep. Marcus had started teaching him to drive in the estate's private driveway, and Donovan had enrolled him in an online education program to catch up on the schooling he'd missed. But more than the material comfort, what seemed to transform Caleb was the sense of purpose. He wasn't just a street kid anymore, surviving day to day. He was a healer, developing his craft, refining techniques that his grandmother had passed down. He was carrying on her legacy in a way that honored her memory. One afternoon, about 3 weeks into the month, a film crew arrived. Donovan had been reluctant to involve media, worried about turning Caleb into a spectacle, but Dr. Martinez had convinced him that documentation was crucial for legitimacy. The crew was from a medical documentary series, known for their sensitive handling of complex health topics. They filmed Caleb working with a patient, interviewed Dr. Martinez about the scientific basis for the treatment, and spoke with Lena about her experience. The resulting footage was powerful, not sensationalized or melodramatic, but thoughtful and compelling. When the documentary aired 2 months later, the response was overwhelming. The clinic Donovan had been planning, tentatively named the Amara Institute after Caleb's grandmother, was flooded with inquiries from patients, doctors, and researchers. Donations poured in. Medical schools expressed interest in incorporating these techniques into their curricula. But there was backlash, too. Some doctors dismissed the documentary as pseudoscience, as dangerous promotion of unproven treatments. Medical boards demanded investigations. Insurance companies refused to cover the therapy. Online forums filled with debates about whether this was real medicine or glorified faith healing. Caleb read some of the criticism and looked devastated. "They think I'm a fraud," he said quietly. "They're afraid," Donovan corrected. Afraid that their years of training might have missed something important. Afraid that healing doesn't always require expensive equipment and pharmaceutical interventions. Afraid that a kid with no credentials might be able to do things they can't. "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" "No," Donovan admitted. "It's supposed to help you understand that this isn't about you. It's about a system that's resistant to change, to anything that challenges its authority. But we have evidence. We have patients whose lives have been transformed. We have doctors willing to learn. That's how you change systems. One person, one success story, one open mind at a time." The month came and went, and when Donovan asked Caleb if he wanted to stay or leave, the boy didn't hesitate. "I want to stay," he said firmly. "I want to build the institute. I want to train other people in these techniques so my grandmother's knowledge doesn't die with me. I want to help as many people as I can." "Then that's what we'll do," Donovan said, and he felt a fierce pride that had nothing to do with money or success and everything to do with watching this remarkable young person step into his power. The Amara Institute opened its doors 18 months after that night at the traffic light. It was housed in a beautiful facility in Santa Monica, designed to be welcoming rather than clinical, with natural light, healing gardens, and spaces that felt more like a spa than a hospital. The staff included Dr. Martinez as chief medical officer, along with a team of hand-selected practitioners who'd trained directly with Caleb. The treatment model combined his traditional techniques with modern medical oversight, creating a bridge between ancient healing wisdom and contemporary neuroscience. Patients were carefully screened, their conditions documented with rigorous testing, both before and after treatment. Success rates were tracked transparently, with both achievements and limitations clearly communicated. Within 2 years, the Institute had helped over 300 patients regain function they'd been told was permanently lost. The success rate wasn't 100%, it never would be, but it was high enough that even skeptical doctors had to acknowledge something significant was happening. Caleb, now 16, split his time between treating patients, training new practitioners, and continuing his own education. Donovan had hired private tutors to help him catch up academically, and Caleb had proven to be an exceptional student, particularly in anatomy, neurology, and psychology. He was already being courted by medical schools, though he hadn't decided yet whether he wanted to pursue a formal medical degree or continue developing his own path. Lena, fully recovered and thriving, had become an advocate for trauma-informed care, speaking at conferences about her experience and the importance of listening to patient stories rather than just their symptoms. She'd started a foundation focused on providing mental health support to accident survivors, recognizing that physical recovery was only part of the healing process. And Donovan, he'd found a purpose beyond profit. He'd redirected significant portions of his wealth towards supporting alternative healing research, funding studies that mainstream institutions wouldn't touch. He'd become a vocal advocate for integrating traditional healing practices with modern medicine, using his platform and connections to force conversations that the medical establishment had long avoided. One evening, 3 years after their first meeting, Donovan and Caleb sat on the terrace where Lena and Caleb had once talked about saving people. The sun was setting in its usual spectacular display, and they were both quiet, lost in their own thoughts. "I never thanked you properly," Donovan said. Suddenly, Caleb looked at him with surprise. "For what? You've given me everything. A home, an education, a purpose." "You gave me my daughter back," Donovan interrupted. "You gave me myself back. Before that night, I was drowning. I'd lost faith in everything, in medicine, in justice, in the possibility that good things could still happen. You proved me wrong. You showed me that healing exists in unexpected places, that gifts come in unexpected packages, that sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who can save us." "I was just doing what my grandmother taught me," Caleb said quietly. "Exactly," Donovan agreed. "You honored her legacy. You took the knowledge she gave you and used it to change lives, and in doing so, you changed mine. So, thank you. Thank you for stopping at that traffic light. Thank you for seeing Lena when everyone else had stopped looking. Thank you for being brave enough to trust us. Thank you for everything." Caleb's eyes were wet. "She would have been proud," he said softly. "My grandmother. She would have loved all of this. The Institute, the patients we've helped, the way people are starting to listen to the old knowledge instead of dismissing it. She always said that healing wasn't about one person's glory. It was about creating ripples that spread outward, touching more and more people. I think we're doing that." "We absolutely are," Donovan confirmed, "and we're just getting started." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Inside the house, they could hear Lena laughing at something Mrs. Chen had said, the sound bright and alive and beautiful. Sometimes, Donovan reflected, miracles happened at traffic lights. Sometimes hope came disguised as a beggar boy with impossible claims. Sometimes the most valuable knowledge wasn't found in textbooks or hospitals, but in the hands and hearts of people who'd learned to see what others missed. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you got a second chance to recognize that value before it disappeared back into the crowd. Donovan had gotten that chance, and he'd be spending the rest of his life making sure others got it too. Because that's what gratitude looked like when you really understood it. Not just saying thank you, but paying forward the gift you'd been given. Creating opportunities for other unlikely healers to share their wisdom, building bridges where others saw only divisions. The Amara Institute was just the beginning. Donovan had plans for satellite clinics, training programs, research partnerships with universities willing to challenge conventional thinking. He had plans to document and preserve other traditional healing practices before they were lost to time and assimilation. He had plans to create a world where someone like Caleb would never have to sleep on the streets, where gifts like his were recognized and nurtured instead of ignored. It was ambitious. It was probably impossible. But then again, so was what Caleb had done that night at the traffic light, and that had turned out to be very, very real.